I have a question, Martin. Everybody's got a question. I have one.
Om Shivaya Krishna Varsana Swami Saraswati Devi Thank you all for coming. Is there any service we can offer?
I have a question. I hope you have some questions.
Don't worry if you don't, because somebody else will.
I will start with my question. So, the last part of Damodar Lila Maharaj, which I really like, when after Krishna delivers Yamarajuna to his, and then Nanda Maharaj comes, and Mother Yashoda is, that's what I like, she's completely, ashamed and regrets.
Remorseful,
and I don't know, Vishwara Maharaj writes that she goes on a self-imposed exile to his room, and she's just crying and doesn't eat and doesn't want to come out. Krishna just doesn't, the only person who exists for him is the Nanda Maharaj. Like, he doesn't want to, he's almost pretends that he's upset with his mother, right? So, would you elaborate? I would like to hear the comments here, because I find it very interesting, the dynamics there.
the dynamics are explicitly personal. All these emotions that we experience in the material world, they're reflections of dynamics and patterns in the spiritual reality. And we make apparently paradoxical statements like separation is the highest ecstasy, which to the three-dimensional mind makes no sense. We're talking about a realm beyond 4 dimensions, a world of infinite dimensions, which at times slips in to our world of 4 dimensions and allows us to see whatever we can and experience some similarities, some calling. So Mother Yashoda was remorseful. And that remorse is a very special exhibition of eternity knowledge and bliss. Because it's all part of catering to Krishna's pleasure. And one delightful aspect of that part of the Leela was Krishna shifted the emphasis to Nanda Maharaj. Now, you can appreciate that from so many different perspectives. There are religions in this world that are patriarchal, And they tend to attract men who might not have the proper respect for the female. And that can lead to bullying, abuse, insensitivity. Whereas the Gaudiya culture is highly matriarchal. And it nourishes very gentle, very compassionate, very caring and sharing propensities. The important thing is not to put too much emphasis on either the male or the female aspects of the divine, but to focus on the relationship, how they complement each other. So Mother Yashoda is very prominent in Damodar Lila. And Krishna wanted to give Nanda Maharaj equal credit. And, it started a little way back. Because when Krishna was finally bound by Mother Yashoda, the gopas are all there, coaching him. And just crawl with it, or something, just don't submit to this. And so he crawled with it. Therefore, the whole desire of Narada was fulfilled in the liberation of Nalika Greva. And only the gopas witnessed that. So when Nanda Maharaj and his associates came, because Arjuna trees, they're like the last to fall in a tornado or a storm. And, there wasn't a tornado or a storm, it just came crashing down. So Nanda Maharaj was perplexed, and the gopas said, Gopal just tugged on the rope, and the water got stuck, and they came crashing down. These two effulgent beings came out and offered their prayers to Krishna and disappeared. And you can't believe that. The gopas come back with all kinds of tales every day. And unless, the elders see some evidence, they don't necessarily take it seriously. So after that, it was clear that, the whole thing wasn't working as intended. So the gopas tried to untie the knot that Mother Yashoda had tied. They couldn't do it. Because the bond of Vatsalya Bhav is stronger than Satya. They couldn't do it. Nanda Maharaj had to go to Krishna. But he was still upset with Mother Yashoda. And he didn't want to go to her. So he went to Nanda Maharaj. And Mother Yashoda feeling, what would you call it? Grief. And she subjected Gopal to that. Subjected herself to self-imposed exile in her room. And even Gopal wouldn't come to her at first. So we see reflections of such sentiments in the material world. But material sentiments, even the higher ones, like what kind of higher sentiments, emotions, can you utilize to open your hearts? The way to open your heart is to contemplate some love that has come into your life at some point. And it doesn't have to be for a spiritual personality like your spiritual master, who would be the most natural object of your gratitude. You can utilize the love of a mother, or a father, or a friend, acknowledging that Krishna put those persons in your life for some good reason. And while you're naturally grateful to such humans, or in my case, it's oftentimes been animals, who can display what most people don't know, most extreme forms of selfless sacrifice and dedication. If you don't work with the natural world, you might not be so aware. And therefore Krishna created 8,400,000 species to reflect different aspects of his nature. And oftentimes you won't appreciate one until it's become extinct, and then you see by default the good you brought into the world. So in spiritual consciousness, everything is different varieties of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. The anguish of separation, the fear of imminent separation, the grief that Mother just showed caused Krishna so much trouble. Varieties of eternity, knowledge, and bliss, which is our goal, to enter into that world. And the bhavas are spiritual emotions. They come through Yoga Maya. We have material emotions until we reach that exalted state. And on the spectrum of emotions that conditioned souls experience, on the lowest end of the spectrum is toxic shame, toxic guilt, selfishness, abandonment, loneliness, uselessness. And if we desire to raise our consciousness, because that's darkness, that's ignorance. If we desire to raise our consciousness, which normally proceeds to passion, to goodness, and ultimately sattva, you can't dispel darkness by darkness. Darkness can only be dispelled by bringing in the light. And illumination is the indication of Krishna's love. Which comes from above and filters, down through parampara and even different agents in the material world. The inner movement of the heart to receive Krishna's love is kindled by an attitude of gratitude. So you can envision the heart, and this is not imagination, this is the spiritual reality. The heart is a lotus. And how do you want to verify that with Shastra? Well, Krishna sits on the lotus of our hearts, as expressed in so many shlokas and prayers. But he's hidden. So we wonder, why is Krishna hiding? Well, we're hiding from him. And he's reciprocating by hiding in our hearts. And if we want to return to him, how do you open your heart? Now, pure love and devotion, or Srila Prabhupada always said devotional service, so we don't see it as passive. It's a very exalted goal. That's the sadhya. to which our sadhana is aligned, beginning with our sankalpa, our intention, which we crystallize into vows. So in the process of elevating our emotions with what we have to work with, understanding that gratitude is the catalyst which begins the movement of the heart from its closed, bud-like form of a lotus, which is not so beautiful, it's not so soft, it's not so fragrant, it's all there, inherently within it. But the qualities are released as it begins to blossom in the sunlight of Krishna's love, but needing the inner movement of the heart in gratitude to complete the dynamic. So when you feel stuck in lower emotions, and then there's the archetypal lust, anger, greed, pride, delusion, and envy, which are all dark, anarthas, that live in the dark and can only be dispelled by the light. So how do you raise your emotions? Well, start with gratitude. And if you haven't experienced a tangible, spiritual awakening or relationship, you can start with someone in your practical life who demonstrated unconditional love, kindness, selfless service, encouragement, support. Someone who's just there when you needed them. Acknowledging that it is Krishna who places these individuals in our life. So you're grateful to the individual in context of Krishna's grace, which keeps it spiritual and proper. And with that gratitude, we can raise ourselves from the depths of dark emotions, gradually working up the spectrum to the midway point, which is neutrality, and then on to the higher sentiments of love, compassion, inspiration, illumination. Now, we may still be in the material realm and still have these qualities of sattva-guna, which are not transcendental, but sattva-guna is the portal to sattva-guna, where the spiritual manifests. And once again, what is the catalyst to inspire the heart to continue blossoming like a lotus, reciprocating the sunlight of Krishna's love? It's that gratitude. And Satyabhata Muni, through his immortal verses of Dhammatarastakam, which in a few short slokas takes us from Namamishwaram Satchidananda Rupam, the Lord who is the embodiment of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. And in those few verses, Namo Radhikaya Tvadiyai Priyai Namo Nantalilai Devaya Tumyam. Going from the supreme masculine to the divine feminine as the queen who bestows grace. Because Krishna is like the sun, full of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. A religion that is highly patriarchal can promote God as Father, who without a mother figure can be hard to live with and hard to get along with. Because and The sun is magic. It's necessary for life. It requires a transformer to soften those burning solar rays into cooling moonlight, which nourishes vegetation in a complementary way, referring or symbolizing Bhakti-lata Bija in our hearts. So, the supreme masculine and feminine are reflected in Vatsalya Bhava as Nanda and Yashoda. And Damodar Lila places so much emphasis on Mother Yashoda. I mean, even when Krishna returned from Dwarka, the devotees were worshipping Yashoda Krishna because she was so inseparable. She could not allow him out of her embrace. Now this time, Krishna's over 100 years old. But through her eyes, he's still that child who's dependent on her care and her milk, and she's bathing him with her tears and milk. And everybody else wanted to worship Krishna on his return after 100 years separation, but they realized you can only worship Yashoda Krishna. They were inseparable. And Krishna relishes that. But he will not allow Nanda Maharaj to go without recognition. So when Mother Yashoda understood that she had overstepped her bounds and was feeling transcendental grief, which is not like the grief we experience. It's a flavor of eternity, knowledge, and bliss. And Krishna didn't even want to go to her. His transcendental anger, which is not like the anger we know in this world. Srimati Radharani also becomes angry with Krishna in an emotion we call man, which means pouting. And Krishna loves that. So bhakti is all about a balanced life in balanced relationships. Gaudiya Vaishnava theology emphasizes service to Srimati Radharani. And that emphasis should never be seen at the exclusion of Krishna's pleasure, because it's the means to derive Krishna's ultimate pleasure. And therefore we always say their names together. Shri Shri Radha Krishna. Shri Shri Kartik Damodar. So the grinding mortar goes along with the pot for churning butter. The butter thief, by his continual stealing and eating butter, is necessitating more churning. And churning the milk is symbolic of churning relationships. Because milk, it represents affection. The cow doesn't give milk, nor does a mother until she has a child. And that affection causes the milk to flow. And a child like Damodar is not satisfied with milk. He wants butter, because that's the essence of milk. And churn. Symbolizing churning, the loving relationships to derive their essence. Sadagrahi Vaishnavas seek the essence. And the essence of Krishna Bhakti is love. All right?
Thank you, Maharaj. It's so interesting that you started talking about balance, because my question would have been, how does balance come into devotional life? And I have recently heard, and I'm sure both are true, that devotional life is completely unbalanced. You know, you can't balance material life and spiritual life, in other words. Because they can't coexist. So maybe can you elaborate a little bit on?
Well, first of all, if appropriate, you can replace the term material life with practical life. Because we all have practical responsibilities and duties and relationships that should be honored. Being irresponsibility towards any obligations in this world is an obstacle to progression in spiritual life. So you can say material, it might be softer to say practical. Practical obligations and how to balance them with spiritual life. And it tends to be an ongoing challenge. And we tend to go through times when things just really seem out of balance and chaotic. Now, chaos is a transition from previous cosmos to increasing harmony. Because previous systems of balance that sustained us in our earlier days start to work against us at some point. And those patterns become embodied in our subconscious mind, of which our physical body is an incarnation. And they're directing the show. Even when your intentions are aligned somewhere else, and your perpetual habits keep you in another paradigm. And to transition from one to the next means that former balance that sustained you to a certain point before which it became obsolete and working, it's a set of patterns. And for the patterns to change from previous obsolete form to one that will sustain you now and here on, there's a breakdown with that. Cosmos is an indication of harmony and balance. But when it transitions from one phase to another, and before the new structure comes into place, the previous one has to dismantle. There will be times of chaos. The thing is, are we perpetuating that? Or are we resisting change? Because going from the known, the systems, the patterns, the conditioning of our childhood or whatever previous stage in life, where everything is familiar. And now you're entering into that river of change where nothing is familiar, nothing is settled, and it's very uncomfortable. And it's very unpredictable. And you get really uncomfortable when you can't predict your future. But there's a way to be comfortable with the uncomfortable, largely by creating your future. And not staying stuck in the tendency to live in the past, however painful and miserable it was, at least it's familiar. And I'll prefer that over the uncomfortable experience of progress. So you stay stuck. And you cling to it because it's familiar, it's predictable. It's miserable, but it's familiar, it's predictable, and it's a comfortable kind of misery. So you cling to it. And then there's the classic example of the disciple asking his guru, and why is it so difficult to overcome an artist? And he says, meet me in the forest. The disciple comes to this forest and he hears his guru crying, help, help. And he runs. What's the matter? He's clinging to this tree. This tree won't let me go. So with all sincere earnest to help, the disciple takes his hand and pulls it off, goes to the other hand, and grabs the tree with that arm. And then finally he realizes, but Guru Maharaj, the tree's not holding on to you, you're holding on to the tree. And then he lets it go. Exactly, that's why it's so hard to become an artist. It's not that there's some unseen hand doing it to you. You're doing it yourself. But it seems like the most Herculean effort is simply letting go. Because it's familiar. In a familiar past, you project into a predictable future, which is unrealistic. But the worst part is you miss all the joy and hope and sustenance which is only found in the present moment. It's like a ping pong ball, going from a miserable past to a dreadful future. And bringing it into a reality is a self-fulfilling prophecy. Krishna consciousness occurs in the present. And if you can't be present in the present moment, your Krishna consciousness progress is going to be very haphazard and sporadic. And that's why we take vows and formulate intentions to align with the goal to keep us on course, to not be distracted and diverted, and just waste time and energy meandering all over. Intentions comprise the journey of our life and define what we'll experience in every moment along the way, and qualify us to respond with grace and dignity to every opportunity and challenge along the way. So we have generic goals, and we say, back to Godhead, and Srila Prabhupada even made that title for his magazine. Now, there's different levels of compassion in different devotees. You know, Vasudeva, the reappearance of Prahlad Maharaj in Chaitanya Lila. He didn't want to go back to Godhead unless each and every soul in the universe could go before him. And Lord Chaitanya affirmed that they're already delivered just by your desire. And you won't have to suffer their karma on your head as you ask, because Krishna is acknowledging your intent, which he accepts without you having to undergo the torment suffering. And even if it's pleasurable, it's still bondage, karma. I mean, pious results are at least uplifting, but it's still something you have to stay here to enjoy in a world of misery. So we say Bhaktivedanta is a generic goal. But every living entity, what to speak of every devotee, are individual and unique. And even Srila Prabhupada said, some deities have pujaris who are servants who keep coming back to serve them. Not perpetually, but for some time. So we have a generic goal which we can adjust according to our independence and nature, and even over time we adjust our goals. They're not all set in stone, frozen. And our intentions we can also adjust. But we have to establish intentions. We have to take vows if we really want all the energies of the universe to align and support us in reaching our goal. And we have to develop integrity. So that our different energies are not all malaligned and working against themselves and ourselves. So when everything seems imbalanced and chaotic, refer back to your intentions and your goal and your integrity. And if your intention is proper, and your goal is appropriate, and your integrity is adequate, you will transition as former structures of consciousness disintegrate and newer patterns develop. All right?
Any other questions?
Thank you so much, Maharaj. I'm just so grateful to have another opportunity to hear you speak. It's not really getting off the subject, but kind of pertaining to the subject, but could you share some of how you came to Krishna consciousness and your journey in your Vrindaban?
Well, the problem is I haven't come to Krishna consciousness. We ignore that part. Where would you like to start?
The beginning?
I was not so fortunate as all of you. As a child, the only Shastra I had was the Bible, which I found inconsistent, mainly between the Old Testament and the New Testament. But then I gradually came to realize that the Old Testament is a backdrop to highlight the New Testament. And there is one pastime that really helped me, which was, of course, the setting was the Pharisees, the religious elite, who were always setting traps for Jesus. They wanted to be rid of him. Because the old order, which is the previous structure, was not like to go through disintegration for something more desirable and pertinent to appear. So, when he was in the synagogue, the Pharisees came in dragging a lady who they informed him was caught in adultery. Now, a child's mind always wondered, why wasn't the man caught in adultery? Which makes you suspicious from the beginning. So they asked Jesus, what should we do with her? Here's the trap. Because the Mosaic law is clear. The punishment for adultery is stoning to death. A public, humiliating execution. That's the law. And if somebody gives another verdict or sentence, that's blasphemy, because the law came from God through Moses. So it's a trap. And how's he going to... He wouldn't condemn someone to death, especially when it's so suspicious that there's no man involved in adultery. And they're watching. So what he did was, you could say he's a genius or creative or whatever, he started writing on the stone floor. And nobody knew to this day what he was writing. But the symbology is clear. The law is written in stone, the 10 Commandments. Jesus is ushering in a new covenant based on grace, compassion, and love. So after writing on the stone floor, he turned to the Pharisees and told them that he who was without sin cast the first stone. Now, at that point, they'd already come to realize that he knows your heart. And if you try to conceal something, it's going to become more obvious. And it's very much like when Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati claimed the form of his departed Gurudev, and the Smartas wanted that for commercial purposes. He said that he who is pure in his dealings with the other gender come forth and claim the body. And they knew they'd be exposed, so they tried to conceal the fact that they were cheaters, so they just one by one left. So the Pharisees all left, and Jesus is there alone with this lady. And he told her, I don't condemn you, nor should you condemn yourself. If you go and sin no more. So I came to appreciate that, okay, the ghastly nature, it's mixed, because in the Old Testament it's the Psalms of David. Tremendously uplifting and inspiring. But there's other things. Make a nice backdrop for the new covenant. So I studied the Bible as a child, but I got stuck at a certain point where Jesus said, I have so much more to tell you, you cannot bear to hear it now. Now that establishes a certain thread that resurfaces at times. Like the premonition of his leaving the disciples. It is better that I leave. So the Holy Spirit can come upon you and lead you into deeper intimacy with me, and he will reveal all things to you. So as a child, I'm looking in the church, I went to the monasteries, I went to the convents, because I lived right next door to a Catholic convent. And I saw the nuns chanting japa every morning. And they're really committed and impressed me. I couldn't get answers. Finally, the pastor of our church gave me the key to his library. He said, you can come anytime and read the commentaries, because I can't answer your questions. Which were like, what does God really look like? The imagery is this old man with a beard, but where did that come from? But the main thing is, what does he do all day? And what can he do in his service? And I just couldn't deal with that. I said, the library is yours. I'm giving him the key. Go through all the commentaries. Share with me your realizations. But there was a big problem in the church. And that was, I promoted that the translation of the 10 Commandments, that thou shalt not murder, was inaccurate. It's thou shalt not kill. So I challenged the pastor. You're not supposed to do that when you're listening. Because he was highly respected. And I challenged him. When the commandment says thou shalt not kill. Now see, before that, I was under an illusion because, I saw so many cows die naturally, and they got taken to the forest. And then later I'd come and collect the cow horns and bull horns so I could call the cows, which wasn't really necessary because they knew exactly when they come back to the barn, but I had to blow this, it's like a buffalo horn, but it's a bull horn. So I thought, because they told me as a child, because they could see my sensitivity and intensity about this topic, that no, we don't kill cows. We just eat them when they die. I was all right with that. And it seemed reasonable because I saw so many of them die naturally. When I found out that that was a lie, and they killed them, I challenged the pastor. How can you change that translation? Thou shalt not kill, thou shalt not murder. It applies to the cows. And we got into an argument, and at the end he told me, if you don't surrender, you're going to go to hell. I said, if you stay stuck in that rhetoric, I'm going to have to reject you. Which for a child who had no authority other than the pastor at that time is intense and severe. And it caused a lot of ramifications in the home, and the family, and the community, and the church. So, my father so much wanted me to go to college. I said, well, I already know how to farm and live off the earth. And nature's my teacher, so why should I go to college? And he was so hurt, so I said, okay, I'll go and study theology. So there, once again, I went through all the commentaries, trying to find that missing link in Christianity. There it was. I'm going to have to turn to the east. So I told my theology professor, who was a close friend, he was really the only reason I was in college, because he was a man of truth. And we had wonderful conversations on spiritual life. So I confided in him that I really appreciate your friendship and teaching, but I need to transfer to the Eastern tradition, because the answers to my questions are not found in Western theology. And then, without thinking, he told me something totally out of character, and it wasn't him speaking. It was coming through him. You don't belong in college. I already knew that. You belong in an ashram, studying at the feet of the Guru. And as soon as he said that, his mouth dropped and his eyes opened wide. Clearly, he couldn't believe he said that. And I didn't wait for him to recover. I ran out. And just before I emerged into the forest, I looked back and he was still standing there. So I yelled out, "Thank you very much," and kept going. Until I got shut up about it. And then all the questions were answered. But there was a problem because I didn't do real well distributing books. But I tried. But I had this tendency that as I was a child, I would adopt birds and other things. And this bird would go to school with me. I was a little kid on my shoulder. And the teachers didn't like that. I'd tell them to get lost, but they keep coming back. So the same thing happened on Sankirtan time. So I tried to hide this bird in the ashram, but somebody told Mother Chaturani. Now I've been telling my authorities all along, I'm not really a city boy. I've never been to a city before. I only came to meet Srila Prabhupada. I'm really a country boy, and I'd like to go to Vrindaban." I said, "Oh no, that's... You're really a city boy, you just haven't learned it yet. When you hear about this bird in the ashram," I said, "Well, maybe you should go to Vrindaban." And then the next day I came in after Sankirtan, and I went into they call it a shoe room, which is the equivalent of our boot room. And I smelled cows. At first I thought I was imagining things, but then I saw there was these boots with manure on them. And then I knew that the Brijabasis are here. But they made it clear, it is forbidden to talk about Vrindaban in the Henry Street Temple. So I would meet with the cowherd boys at night after everybody went to bed. And we would scheme a great escape. And then finally when they left, because of the bird in the action, I said, "Well, yeah, I hope it works out for you." And then in Srila Prabhupada, I saw the fulfillment of everything that was lacking in Christianity and everything that was alluded to by Jesus himself. "Better I leave you now, so the Holy Spirit, the Paraclete, which in Greek is the Comforter, the Counselor, the Advocate, our Advocate to God, so that He can come to you and lead you into deeper intimacy with me, and He will reveal all things to you." So I saw the first indication of that in my theology professor. I saw the perfect integration of that in Srila Prabhupada. And then here in Vrindaban, I was allowed to go back to my first teacher, his Mother Nature. Because I only had two interests in life. One was, a natural life, which put an emphasis on agriculture, so you really depended on the earth, and theology. But I saw them integrated in natural living. So here, we were dedicated to natural living. So, and then the intrigue with Srila Prabhupada's statement that New Vrindavan is not different from Loma Vrindavan. And he said you can make it better by managing the population so you don't have Mayavadis and Sahajis and such things. And how Sri Dham manifests herself blossoming like a lotus in response to Srila Prabhupada's invocation that Vrindavan manifests herself here in the hills of Appalachian. And I've heard so many times, why West Virginia? I say, because that's the best place. Does anybody know where West Virginia is? It's too far west to be east, too far east to be west, too far north to be south, too far south to be north. It's a perfect place to cultivate the understanding that really I'm nobody nowhere, with nothing, and what's left, and we eliminate all that, but pure consciousness, whose identity is Das, Das, and just marvel, especially Chaitanya Charitamrita came out. I never imagined that there was a theology like this that not only explains what God looks like, what He does all day, how His servants interact with Him. That's there in the Bhagavatam. But what are His deepest, innermost thoughts? It's there in Chaitanya Charitamrita. I just couldn't believe it's such a Shastra accepted in this world. And then, I've told it a number of times, but it's so important, that Darshan and Sankirtan Prabhu's house with Srila Prabhupada. I'll just summarize it because Srila Prabhupada's very peacefully sitting on the Vyasa-san, had lions as armrests, he's petting the lions. And right here, Godbrother Tanadas asked this question: how do we preach to the local farmers they say we have no time for Krishna consciousness because we're farmers. It takes up all your day, which it does. And the idea that it gives you enough time for other things is an illusion. It's a lifestyle that's so conducive to Krishna consciousness that you can say it saves time, but it really puts you in a different context of time, where remembrance of Krishna is very natural. So anyways, Dr. Asma, how do we respond to those farmers? So Srila Prabhupada is sitting on the vyasana, Drishtadyumna Maharaj standing him with a chama on this side, and Krishna Maharaj chanting him with a peacock feather on this side. So Srila Prabhupada called the Drishtadyumna Maharaj, how would you answer that question? And he said very confidently, according to Bhagavad Gita, and Srila Prabhupada went like this, forcefully, don't bring in Bhagavad Gita. Now, Brijavasis are known for their ability to fall asleep in Bhagavatam class and other times when we should be really attentive. But this really got devotees' attention. You can't bring in Bhagavad Gita to answer the question. So he turned to Krishna Maharaj, how would you answer? He was on the spot, so he tried. According to Krishna, and Srila Prabhupada did the same thing. Don't bring in Krishna to this conversation. Now, if you read the transcripts, there's a lot missing. The audience gave such a steadying impact to the lesson he wanted to impart. Don't bring in Bhagavad Gita. Don't bring in Krishna. And nobody wanted to venture any further possibilities. So Tharu was sitting there, and then Srila Prabhupada leaned over. He got what you would say in the vernacular right in his face, in a nice way. And he's still animated. Like, rascal! Not meaning Tharu, meaning the imaginary farmers he was representing. Rascal, can you make it rain? Can you make the sunshine? You are totally dependent on Krishna in every step in life. Can't you show a little gratitude? So I was thinking, this is wonderful. This is Guru. He's giving us the highest theology and keeps bringing us back to kindergarten to see if we got the initial essential lessons, which is gratitude. And then recently I was reading Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary on Brahma and Lila. When Brahma, thinking himself guilty for causing Gopal so much trouble, came before the Lord and, offered his very eloquent prayers with his golden crowns at Gopal's lotus feet, drenching the earth with his tears. Brahma, the original Guru in Vaishnava Sampradaya, imagine, you can see how eloquent are his prayers. And Gopal is standing there, didn't say a word and didn't make any gesture. Because he's wondering, who's this four-headed personality? And where does he come from? And what's he talking about? I don't understand any of this. And he's still holding the Krishna surprise from a year ago to sustain him on the journey seeking out the calves and goats. So he's standing there. I don't understand this. And in the Bhagavatam, there's no recording of words exchanged, but Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur proposes some internal dialogues that were playing out, where Krishna told Brahma that normal people feel grateful when they receive a gift they find meaningful and valuable, which means has some loving intention to it. I am grateful in the memory of the future when devotees will offer me something I find meaningful or valuable, and I reciprocate with them, in advance. So if you put together what Srila Prabhupada imparted in that Darshan And what Sri Vishwanath Thakur is revealing in Brahma Mohan Lila, you see that gratitude is a divine sentiment. It's like a catalyst that elevates our emotions from lower modes to Shuddha, to Sattva-guna. But even the finest, most positive, practical emotions have a downside, a negative component. Like you think of what? Your loving mother, and your heart opens to gratitude and affection. But you're also plagued with, I didn't serve her properly. So it's mixed. We're still in the realm of duality, even in Sattva-guna. To transition from here to the threshold of transcendence, which is Shuddha Sattva. There again, the key that opens the door is gratitude. Because Krishna wants to give. It's only gratitude that opens and thereafter nourishes the heart so you're capable to receive. And when you align those two, between your sankalpa and your sati, your goal, with intentional living, keeping it in integrity, then gradually the gate opens and you're granted entrance into Shuddha Sattva, which is the aim of transcendence. We're all searching for Krishna, whatever we think may be our priorities. And Srila Prabhupada has come to give us Krishna. And for those who are attached to a holy place and all the support she gives for all our processes of devotional service, He's given us Vrindaban. Our time is up.
Thank you, Maharaj, so much for so generously sharing with us your wisdom and stories. And I have two announcements. So, the first one is that if there's still some of you who do not have Maharaj's book, Appreciating Your Vrindavan Dham, there is a chance, not just a chance to get the book because it's available there, but a chance to have it signed personally by Maharaj for you. So that's one. And we have another thing, that we have a very special person with us. We're going to celebrate. We have a celebration of Narada Thakur's disappearance day, birthday of Premananda Prabhu. And we have a 10th birthday of Parikshit. Wow.